Welcome to another episode of The Wealthy Boss Show. I have such a wonderful guest here with you today to talk about a very important topic and one that ties in so closely with our self-care, whether or not you're experiencing grief now or you will be facing it at some point as an entrepreneur. How we take care of ourselves during these critical times in our life really sets a trajectory for the type of people that we become, the type of lives that we're designing as entrepreneurs, and that ultimately the type of satisfaction that we have in our life. So I'm joined today by Natalia Volz, the owner of Passing Through Grief. And she is, Natalia, do you consider yourself, what is your title, your role? Is it a grief coach? Is it a grief counselor? What is your specific role as an expert in the topic of grief?
Yes. Okay. That's a good question. A lot of people ask, what is your, what are you? What is your title? And what I like to say is I think of myself as a grief guide. I believe that loss and change in our life is common to life. We are all going to experience a lot of loss and grief, some greater, some more significant than others, some more painful. But we are naturally set up as human beings to deal with loss and change. And yet we have a lot of inaccurate information. So I guide people, teach them. I started as a teacher. So I think of myself as a teacher and a guide and someone to walk through the pain of loss and change with another.
Great. Wow. Such an important role and such a heavy one. And I'm so glad there are people like you that rise up to that challenge. How did you become a grief expert?
So it came out of my own personal experience. It started when my husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the age of 48.
Oh,
and
that's exactly the age my husband will be turning in a month. Wow.
And it's not, we had 3 young children. Certainly, he was healthy. He exercised. We ate well. And it was not at all what we expected. And people said, he doesn't have pancreatic cancer. He's too young. It's an older man's disease. And it actually is hitting people at much younger and younger ages. And when he was diagnosed, we were told right away that he might die within 6 months. So I thought we tried to jump into preparing, and yet I learned after he died 19 months later that there really is not a preparation. So even knowing in advance, people often say, well, you had time to prepare. The truth is, it's hard when we have no time to prepare, and it's hard when we have time. And just being given the diagnosis, the grief begins. The loss had happened as soon as we get the diagnosis. Life is not the same when he's sick and knowing that someone's going to be leaving. So that was the start for me, was that I couldn't find my way through my grief. And I really thought I was someone who had done a lot of personal growth. We really had cared for ourselves. I was spiritual, and I thought that I would be able to do it. And then I was shocked by what happened after and what it felt like after I experienced that loss. And so I read all the books, and I was doing yoga, and I was doing all this self-care, walking and jogging and all of these different things, thinking that would help me move through it. And self-care is important, and we'll talk about that later, but it didn't move me through the pain, the emotional pain that I was feeling. And so I did find my way through. Someone told me that I needed to go through a program. I did. And within weeks, I felt like a different person. And I felt really called to help others, because there's just so much incorrect information about how to move through grief. And I struggled, and it really can affect, as we'll talk about today, truly, it is a high stressor on our body. And it's really important that people don't suffer for as many years as they do normally.
Wow. With that in mind, so I think sometimes we have preconceived notions of what grief is or what it looks like. The first thing we always think of is losing a loved one, and we're grieving them because we miss them. How do you interpret grief? I mean, I'm sure it comes in all sorts of flavors. And what is your wider definition of what grief is?
Okay, the Grief Recovery Institute, which is where I had my first training, described grief as the normal and natural response to significant loss or change. The normal and natural response. So what I always say to clients is, what happens to a baby when you pull the bottle out of their mouth when they aren't finished drinking?
They cry.
They cry. And what happens if you say, hey, don't cry. It's okay. You'll have food again someday. do they stop crying? What do?
They do not.
they may scream louder, right? And they're going to cry until their needs are met. And that's the same with any loss. But what happens is, as we get older, our parents and authority and people that we look up to don't have the correct information about moving through grief. And so when we lose our best friend, and our best friend says, I don't want you anymore as a best friend, I'm going to take a new best friend. And our parents go, oh, she was no good anyway, you'll find another best friend. Or something gets stolen and they say, we can go out and get you a new bike. And that they don't validate our experience of pain with that loss. Yeah. But they're telling us that we can replace the loss, or that we shouldn't feel bad. So block your feelings. And so then when we become adults and we have a true significant loss, we are not prepared with how to actually move through it normally and naturally. We are human beings who are perfectly made, and we have all we need within us to move through loss, because loss is part of life. Yeah. But we learned the wrong information, and so then we have trouble moving through it. So that's why, unfortunately, we need to pay people to get the right information, because it's just a shame. I always say, when people call me and they say, my friend was just diagnosed with cancer, or my friend is going through a divorce, I don't know what to say. I want her to call you. And I say, no. You need to be there for her. She doesn't need a professional who she doesn't know. Okay. She needs her friend. So I will work with you on what to say and do so that you can help her through. And if she needs help later on, I'm here. But initially, we need community. We need friends and family to surround us. And that's some of the wrong information, is we think they want to be alone. So anyway, I could talk forever.
Yeah. Well, so I know people, I'm sure you could probably list them out in very scientific fashion. People, I'm sure, have very different responses to grief, and not to overgeneralize, but wealthy bosses are entrepreneurs. They're ambitious. They take a lot on, and they tend to be very, very type A. Many of us as entrepreneurs, and I can speak candidly, I haven't even shared this with you yet, but I actually just recently suffered a very complicated loss of a family member just a few months back. And I thank you. And I feel like the temptation as entrepreneurs is to throw ourselves into our work, and I think try to have that sense of control. Yeah. What's going on with that? What's going on? Whether it's the loss of a loved one, or the loss of a job, which might have propelled us to want to move into this entrepreneurial space and create this life that we have some agency in. What's going on there when we try to throw ourselves into our work not necessarily but when that's our comfort zone, is to work harder to control our situations.
So what happens is, you're right, with type A personalities, and what we've learned just in our culture is keep busy, block our natural emotions. And any loss, it could be divorce, it could be job loss, it could be a loss of your health as you knew it. It could be infertility. It could be moving out of your home. It's death. It's, the end of a close relationship. All of that is loss. Yeah. And as I said, the natural response in our body is a lot of energy is built up when we have a loss. So what happens is your body goes into confusion. Like, oh my gosh, wait, I can't talk to this person again. My body isn't working the way I want it to work. And what happens inside our body is a great amount of energy is kind of generated as a result of that loss. And we need to move that energy. But what we're taught is to stuff it. Yeah. So we are somewhere we hear And I hear it all the time. And when I went through my loss, I heard it. People would say, it's so great that you're back to work so soon. That's wrong information. So the person goes, oh, good. People are happy with it. And we want to please people. And
we don't want them to worry about us or doubt us.
And part of that is because your brain goes into high alert. We are human beings who need other humans to survive. We are not turtles. I'll say turtles have their shell. We don't. We need other people to surround us when we're in loss and pain, because we aren't safe in the world by ourselves. Loss. We can't survive out in the wilderness. If you are going through pain, we are designed to have our community surround us and protect us while we get back to a place of not get back to, but until our brain and our body processes what has occurred and finds a way to move forward. So when you go through loss, what's really stressful and dangerous for entrepreneurs and really type A people is the prefrontal cortex, the front of our brain, which is the most developed part of our brain, where we plan for the future, where we do our critical thinking and take care of all the problem solving in our business. Well, they've done brain scans, and that part is shut down when you are grieving.
That makes sense. And we actually talk a lot about the role of the prefrontal cortex when it comes to, when we're not taking care of our bodies. We talk a lot about that in here. So that's interesting that the grief connection is a very, very close parallel to that.
So what is lit up is the base of the spine and the amygdala and the fear, the fight or flight. And your primitive part of your brain is then in full alert. And what it's saying is, how do I stay safe in this moment? It can't plan for the future. It's saying, what do I need? So you are on super alert for people who are giving you looks like they're scared to death. Like when my husband died and they'd see me in the grocery store and they'd be like, crap, could I run down another aisle? I don't know what to say to her.
Right. Yep.
And so we're very aware of people who can't handle what we're going through.
Yeah.
And so we isolate as a way to protect ourselves. And I used to put on the makeup. I'd stay home most of the time. And when I had to go pick up my kids at the elementary school, I'd get myself all made up and I'd show up in public and people would say, oh, you're handling this so well. You're so amazing. You're so strong. And I would go home and fall apart. But I was doing it alone. That is stressful on our bodies. And so all of our organs are in high stress mode. Our heart is working extra hard. Often what happens is our digestive system kind of shuts down or gets funky. Our sleeping changes. We either need lots of sleep and we're not listening to that because we have to go back to work and we have a business that has to keep going. And so we don't listen to the signs in our body. Our body is a perfect organism and it will tell us what we need, but we've learned to not listen to it. And that's why your podcast is so important. I've listened to your interviews and you are doing the right work.
Thank you.
And listening to your body and telling, you're saying, like, do yoga. Like, you don't have to do one form of exercise. But when you are going through grief, when you have experienced any loss in your life, you have got to listen to how your body will guide you to what you need. I say you don't have to eat, you need water, but people will bring you lots of food. In the beginning, you mainly need liquids, maybe some vegetables and fruit. You don't need heavy lasagnas that everybody's dropping up here. Your body is shutting down, is really like, I'm in this fear place. It is saying it can't process heavy foods. So
that is so interesting.
So it's very interesting. I find it fascinating. And I think there's such a lack of accurate information out there. And I'm really passionate about sharing and helping people know you're not crazy when you're going through loss. You just have the wrong information.
That's so helpful. Kind of, if we could dive a little bit more into what you said about the energy levels, because I feel like managing our energy is something we talk a lot about as entrepreneurs because it oftentimes feels so stretched thin, but it's also one of our biggest commodities. So can we talk a little bit more about when we're going through the grief process, which is incredibly depleting, but at the same time, you're telling us that it's generating this energy, which is probably kind of confusing to the body. Tell me a little bit more about what we do with the energy changes that are going on within our bodies and our psyches.
Yeah. And I like what you said. I think you asked me something a little earlier that I don't know if you asked it, but you mentioned that everyone goes through grief. It's unique to each person. So no two people experience it the same because no two people are the same, and no relationship. Even if I lost my mother and you lost your mother, I may say, I know what my pain was like. Tell me about your pain. But it's not the same as mine because my relationship with my mother is different than your relationship with yours. So I want to say that first, that grief is really unique. So I will never tell a client or a person, I know what you're going through and I know just what you need right now.
Right.
What I do is I help them pull out of themselves what they need. And so I recall when my husband was diagnosed early, there was a period when I had so much energy, like I was just like, I'd look in the mirror or I'd be driving and I'd look in the rearview mirror and my eyes were popping out of my head. There was so much fear and anxiety. I felt like running. I started running and I'm not a runner. Like I never liked running. And people would say, oh, it's so great. I see you out running. And I felt like saying, I am trying to run from my life. I had so much energy that needed to go. Like I just had to move it out.
Yep.
There were other times when I was completely exhausted and I needed lots of sleep.
Yep.
And that was okay too. You know, it meant that I would get up in the morning, I'd get the kids off to school, I'd go over to the office, I'd answer emails, I'd get as much set up as I could, and I'd go back to bed for a couple of hours.
Yeah. And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, I think that's so interesting. I feel like everyone's goal for us, if we're going through a deep loss, is for us to return to, quote unquote, normal as soon as possible. And I think that's the measure by which, we gauge how well we're doing or how healthy we are, and often internally as well. And so there is that temptation, like, well, if I always got up at 5 a.m. before, I shouldn't be letting myself sleep into 7 a.m., which I was finding over the winter and, already going through the international adoption process, which I know you've been through yourself. So I'm excited to have you on the show for that regards as well. And going through, working a day job and running a business and then experiencing loss on top of that, I was like, crap, like I had a timeline to take care of here. And recognizing that I actually did need more sleep than normal. It in some ways felt like a little bit of a failure, but at the same time, I did listen to that, knowing that there were things going on in my body.
And I love that you're honest. Yeah, I love that you're honest about that, because that is so right. And I felt the same way. I felt like I was failing, like I wasn't doing well. And the truth is, we don't in our society give ourselves enough time. When you think of the shock that our body really is going through, our brain and our body is going through, and we don't, everything's supposed to be quick. I had friends who were going, get on antidepressants. And the doctor, when I went to my doctor and said my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and she goes, you need to be on antidepressants. And I listened to her and got on them at first. And later I said, isn't this like, I'm not depressed. I'm going through a major, horrible situation, but the antidepressants didn't work anyway, but it's everybody wants a quick fix.
Yeah.
And the truth is that we're not failing when we listen to our body.
I love that.
And if our body needs sleep, what I say is a success is to listen to our bodies.
That is so good.
And so many people don't have that. I worked at a hospice for a few years to get more training. I really wanted to have access to more grieving people and to just really learn about it. And so my job was to call people and to help the nurses and everyone to understand grief. And so I was their grief expert, and we'd have these group meetings every other week, and the nurses would say, so-and-so isn't doing well. And it was two weeks after the loss. And I said, can you tell me, what does that look like not doing well? And she said, oh, every time I call, she's crying. I said, she's doing well. It's all those people that pretend they're doing okay who are not doing well because they're blocking their natural response to loss. Not that you have to cry. You don't have to cry.
Right.
I'm not saying that you have to cry, but when people say, yeah, I'm back to work, I'm doing okay, I'm handling this, you have to dig deeper and don't at all assume, because that is not the normal and natural response to a significant loss.
I love that's how you frame it, that this is what's natural, this is what's normal, and we might be afraid of that, but that, I think, is such a good way to frame it. What about those of us who feel more private and we're already feeling guarded and we're already feeling that sense of not letting that sense of control? I mean, should we be falling apart in the grocery store to everyone who asks us? Like, how do we navigate who that safe inner circle is to be real if constantly being vulnerable all the time feels like a little heavy?
Yeah, I mean, we've had our heart, the truth is, like, we've had our heart ripped open. It's like we're kind of walking around like open heart surgery, It's frightening, and we don't have control a lot of times. And so, I remember I tend to lean toward the introverted side, and I was a very private person, and I live in a small community, and I just everybody knew what was happening, and that was really hard. And also, a lot of people say things that hurt and they don't know what to say. And so, no, it's not that we need to open up to everyone. Absolutely not. And I even say to community members who will call me and say, what should I do for this person? I want to help them. Don't force a friendship that was not there. I mean, you could help by dropping off a meal or sending a card, but don't show up. And I had people come over and I didn't know them. And then I'm trying to take care of them when when they're chatting to me, and I'm just like numb.
Taking your energy, right.
Yeah. But what we all need is we need one person. So if you're private, that's fine. But we do need one person who can walk beside us, not tell us you're fine, but can say, I'm here. If you fall apart, I'll hold you up, or I'll sit with you while you fall apart. And you know what? I can handle anything that comes your way. Like, I'll be here. I'll hold your hand, and I can't imagine what you're going through, but I'm going to stand by your side. That's all we need. We just need one person, and we don't have to share our stuff with everyone, because most people don't know how to handle it, and they can be disrespectful of it.
Yes, which kind of leads me into something I was wanting to ask you as well. What about instances of complicated grief, where the relationship should have been a certain way, but in my case, it didn't look that way. And so then you've got the grief compounded with people's expectations of what you should be feeling or what you shouldn't be feeling, or what you should be doing during the process and what you shouldn't. What are a few guidelines or a few pointers that you can suggest to people who are experiencing? People may think they know what they're feeling, but if they don't know the dynamics of that relationship, the person could actually be feeling something completely different or completely conflicting.
Yeah. One thing what I want to say to friends, so anybody who's listening who has not experienced loss, I want them to know you never know how they're feeling. Yeah. I don't care what. Just go in there with a non-judgmental, loving curiosity. Can you tell me about how you're feeling? Because I can't imagine, but I want to be there for you. Don't ever assume. I'm telling you, the majority of the people I work with, a lot of women come to me after their mother died. And it's often 5, 10, 20 years after their mother died. And they said that they still feel such great pain. Grief is not done in 6 weeks. It's not done in 6 months. It's not done in a year. Time does not tell us when we'll get through grief. It's what we do that gets us through grief. We have to take specific actions to heal the pain. So what happens is, I'll have people come to me and they'll say, I remember at the funeral, everyone was telling me I had the greatest mother and she was so giving. And they would tell me stories about how she was there for them. And you know what? I couldn't tell them she hadn't really been there for me that way.
Right.
And so we stuff that hurt
Mm-hmm.
and put on the happy face, and we carry it quietly. And we need a place to tell the whole story of the relationship.
Right.
I also have had a number of people who've gone through divorce, and, you know, friends will say, well, he was such a jerk. He was, you should be glad that you're done with that. Well, you know what? They had hopes and dreams for that relationship. They didn't marry the person expecting it to end that way. They may have children together. They may have animals and pets together. Mm-hmm. They are in pain because what they had hoped for did not work out. Mm-hmm. And they need a place to say, you know, I don't know. I love him. I hate him. I wish I could stay with him. I can't stay with him. Their grief is so many different feelings and emotions that our brain is all, you know, when my husband was dying, he was very sick at the end. One part of me was like, die. I am exhausted. I can't do this anymore. And you're wasting away and you're in pain. I don't want you suffering. I don't want to suffer anymore. Another part was like, you can't die. What am I going to do? Yeah. So it's very complicated, all grief.
Yeah.
Complicated grief. Sometimes someone will die. You know, I remember reading an article about a woman whose husband died, and then she found out he'd been having an affair for 10 years.
My goodness. Wow.
Now what do you do? You have all of this. Who was he? What was my love? Did he really love me when he gave me this?
Yeah.
And people will say, well, what a jerk. Just get over him and move on. No, we have so much that we need to work through and talk through and have someone say, yeah, I can't, tell me about what you're feeling.
Yeah. Well, that's so helpful.
Yeah. So we all need that. We all need someone to say, tell me and I will not judge you and I will not tell you how to be. Yeah. I just want to be here with you.
That's so beautiful. And that's really, I think, what everyone is looking for in life, and even outside of the realm of grief. I think those are universal themes that we feel as humans. So I love that. Yeah. We talked a little bit about self-care, and I'd like to take it from the lens of there's no one size fits all. There's nothing that can erase the pain that we're feeling. That's not what self-care is supposed to do. But how does taking proper care of ourselves throughout the grieving or loss process, how does that aid us to be in the healthiest place we can be?
Okay. So remember that grief is extremely stressful on our body, on our mind, on every area of our body, on everything. So know that it is a great stress. Think of what really worried me was after my husband died, we had my daughter who was in 4th grade. She had a classmate whose father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer just a couple of months after my husband was. Wow. So I became friends with them. And we both knew that, I mean, they had to have like a school meeting because we had 2 kids and someone's dad was going to die. Yeah. And anyway, I became friends with her, with the wife. Her husband died the next September. My husband died December. And we tried to help each other through grief, but, you know, we were just suffering so much. It was hard. A year after her husband died, she called me and said, are you sitting down? I've been diagnosed with non-smoker's lung cancer. And it's metastasized to my brain. And she died a year later, leaving her 2 children orphaned. And what happened was I stupidly started keeping a folder of people I was hearing about where one spouse died and then the other young spouse died or was diagnosed with a terminal cancer after. And I said, this is not coincidence. It is just not coincidence. I don't know if you remember Superman, Christopher Reeve. And his wife was diagnosed. She took care of him for 10 years. Mm-hmm. And a year after he died, she was diagnosed with non-smoker's lung cancer. Now think about it. Where are the lungs?
Right around the heart.
Very close to the heart.
Wow.
And there is a truth to dying of a broken heart. It is seen again and again, heart problems, heart attacks within 2 years after a loss. Suicide is increased because we can't plan and we can't see a way out, and bills are coming in and we don't know we can't critically think.
Yeah.
So know that grief causes stress, great stress on your body. We need to work through grief.
Yeah.
It is truly causes chronic illness. Accidents are increased. I'd come out of a store, and one time I came out of the store and my music was blaring. My car was on, and this did not happen once. Numerous times I left my car running, and I would get out of the car with the keys in the car, go in and do something, and come out to a running car.
Wow.
Never in my life had I done that.
Yeah.
You are having almost an out of body, like you are just not present.
Mm-hmm.
So very important that we care for our bodies.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is listen to how that is. So I had a friend who paid for yoga classes for me. Mm-hmm. And she picked me up and brought me to yoga classes the winter and spring after my husband died. And I would go in, and luckily the room was pretty dark, and sometimes I would just be bawling my eyes, but I was moving energy with just this soft movement and whatever song and how I was led through it. It didn't cure my grief, but it was a way that I helped the stress in my body.
That's really a helpful distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought it would help me cure my grief. And it didn't, but it was very important for keeping my body healthy. I never got sick in the years that I couldn't find my way through grief. I never came down with the flu, which is people always tell me, I think I have the flu, or I don't know what it is. Very common. I didn't get any chronic illnesses. What I was doing is I turned to breathing exercises. So I really monitored, because we get very shallow breath when we're grieving and we're under stress, and that is telling our body that something's not good. Yeah. So when we have a very shallow breath, so practicing being conscious of, notice, I would set alarms on my phone to check in with myself. And I would try like once an hour to say, okay, take some deep breaths in, put on some calming music, and see if I can really get my breathing to say, okay, we're okay right now. I got into meditation, which was not trying to quiet my brain because that was too hard, but listening to guided meditations, soft music. Another thing I did was I created a playlist of songs that could get me crying really quickly. And it's like, it seems bizarre, but then I researched it. Okay. And it is actually good. It's a way to move. If we were told not to cry, it is a way that we move energy. There are tears. There are a few different kinds of tears. If you have wind blowing and you have tears, it has a different feel to it than the tears when you are sad. Yeah. They have a heavier feel to them. They're more like slimy. There are stress hormones that are released when we cry. So listening to music that can get you to move those feelings is really good. And to get you crying is a release. Another way to release pent up energy is to dance. So I would put on music that I couldn't stop. Like it just has a beat to it. And I have a list. I have a YouTube channel, and I have a lot of it, like 100 videos, and you can just watch them. And I have a bunch of ways that you can move. It doesn't necessarily heal your grief, but it helps you release the stress that grief can cause. And so getting yourself to just dance wildly can move that. Walking in nature is another one. Nature. I think you mentioned that one on one of your podcast interviews. I think you might have said something about nature versus walking on a treadmill. Treadmills are great. Did you say that?
Yes, I had a whole episode on the mind body benefits of plants and nature, and then we've chatted about that a couple of times. How the outdoors will be. Yeah,
so outdoors is actually even better. If you can't get outdoors, it's better to do something indoors. But there's something about being out, and what I would do is when I walked in nature, I would look at the plants and I would look at the squirrels and the birds, and I would say, okay, they are guided naturally how to do, like what to do when a storm hits and what to do when things don't go their way. So I am too. And I would just look to nature while I walked to become present. And I would just look and say, there's a squirrel, there's this. And that would bring me back to the present moment, because we're really having like this, we keep going out into fear about the future and regret about the past. And we want to bring ourselves into the present moment as much as we can while going through grief to help our stress.
This has been such an amazingly helpful conversation. I love how you take these philosophical things that are so important and so foundational and break them down into really practical things that we can do to make sure that we are as whole and healthy as we can be in a way that's natural and not forced, but the way that we were designed. Where can people learn more about you, whether they're experiencing loss themselves, whether they want to be a support system for someone they know who's going through it? How can they access what you have to offer and the assistance that you provide?
Thanks. Well, I have a website, passingthroughgrief.com. And I also have a book, which people have said, I wrote the book that I wanted because I was trying to read myself through grief, which you can't intellectualize. Grief is an issue of the heart. It's a broken heart, not a broken head. So it's hard to intellectualize, which a lot of people try to do. But I wrote a book that tells my personal story through grief, how I moved through it, and it gives tools and tips for moving through grief. So you can get that on Amazon. It's called Passing Through Grief, and that's also through on my website. And that's just a great, inexpensive way to get some tips about how to begin to move through grief. And like I said, the YouTube, go to YouTube. I also have a Facebook page, Passing Through Grief, and I do live. I have a live show on Monday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I'll have a lot of people who will ask questions and we'll talk, and I'll have a subject each week. So I really want to offer some free ways if people aren't able just to get the help that they need and to get some tips along with, if you really are ready and able to move through the grief, the best is to work with me individually or in a small group.
Of course. Well, thank you so much. We'll be sure to link to all those resources in the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your heart, your expertise with us. It's been so valuable for me personally, and I know for our listeners as well, whether they're experiencing grief, supporting someone else through grief, or will in the future. So thank you so much, Natalia.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.